Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is a follow-up on the previous video where I painted the Cobra Jet. Now let me just give you some information. I had filmed with a different camera. I have an Insta360 that I had set up above the car, and I had filmed the spraying of the base coat. The problem I ran into is my main computer that I use for editing, my desktop computer, had a crash. And I wasn't able to edit that footage with my laptop because it just doesn't have the capacity. So the computer's getting fixed right now, and I hope to re-edit some of that, and I may use it in this video so that you can see some of the process I was doing. I know I had a time lapse from the end of the shop or the paint booth, and you could just see most of it, but this one is actually from the top, and maybe it'll help with some of that information. So I'm pretty excited about how this looks. I've gotten some great comments on YouTube. I've gotten great comments on Facebook, and I'm really excited about how this car turned out, or how the paint turned out. Spraying metal flake is a challenge. Spraying this kind of clear coat can be a challenge. And I do have the flaws that I will talk about with the runs and stuff like that, but all of that should sand and buff out just fine. So what I want to do is I want to take the car and get it back on its wheels and roll it outside in the sun. And hopefully I get enough angles with the, with the sun to show the flake and all that sort of thing. So let's take one more quick look at the car and also some other things that I have to do. So I know I mentioned this stuff up here, the cowl panel, the deck lid, the hood, and I had ordered a stripe kit for the Mach 1, and apparently they make one for the Boss 302 cars. So there's the stencil kit 507-ST. The difference being the width of the stripe here, or this gap between the stripe. On the Mach 1 kit that I have, this stripe is 1/4 inch, and on the 302 cars this is 1/8 of an inch. The original hood for this car had the 1/8 inch stripe, so I ordered this kit. I'm going to use that. So I will need to prep this hood and the cowl panel for the blackout, and I'll probably detail more of that later. I have something else to show you on the original hood. So right now all this stuff is up here in the front of the shop, and I'm going to have to do some rearranging because I know I need to wet sand the body and get ready to buff. So I have the door open just to get some air in here, but I want to put the wheels on this, and I may put the Magnum 500 wheels on it from my Mach 1 just because of the visual appeal of that. I may put those on and roll it out the door so we can see it in the sun. I've already talked about some of the flaws that I've had where it's a little dry right here, and there's also some sag over here on this side, as I mentioned, and a few other spots where there's some runs, particularly on the door up in this section. And this fender looks good. There is some dust nibs and stuff up on top, and there's one run right there. The extensions, I don't see any runs or anything with those, so I'm not going to worry about those too much. But I want to get this, I think, back on the ground and get it out the door and get a look at it. So I'm going to do that next. It's hard to get the sun where I want it right now, but it's almost, 2 o'clock, and so it's kind of overhead, and I'm happy. There's a little bit of orange peel in the door, not a big concern. The color looks right. I was so, inside it looks good, but when you get it outside and you start seeing it in the sun, that's where the proof is. So everything looks good. Really, really can't complain. A couple little runs, like I said, little orange peel there. You can see the reflection. Hopefully see the reflection of that wheel. But overall, very, very happy with it. Very, very happy with it. I'm going to continue on with the sanding and buffing process. I've already started on that on the deck lid. I know that I've mentioned it before, and you're going to see some time lapse on this, and I'll probably talk over it some, but I'm trying to get everything squared away with the back, and I had a little problem right here with some buildup of clear coat, and I think I got it figured out. So that feels good to see it out in the sun. Really makes it pop. So yeehaw, more to come. Now I know a lot of this can be pretty boring, but I wanted to do some demonstration here. These holes on the back of this deck lid, they created like little valleys where the clear coat didn't flow, and I needed to get that knocked down to give it a smoother look. I also had some clear coat on the corners here that it kind of created a ridge, and this probably could have been avoided if I had sprayed one more round of clear on the back face of the deck lid, but I didn't. I also had some drips, let's say, on the bottom of the deck lid as well, and I was able to sand most of those off. So here I just zoomed in a little and wanted to show you some of the remaining grooves that were, or little valleys that were coming off those holes. And as I'm doing this, I also am concerned with some of the buildup here at the bottom edge. So once you dry this out, you can see where the shiny spots are. You know, it's a lot harder to see that when it's wet, but you can see those shiny spots, and I'm pointing them out a little bit here and there where I see those areas. So I'm sanding those down, and I'm trying to be very careful to not go through the bottom edge of that deck lid. I switch over to 1200 grit, and I just repeat the same process. Again, I know this is tedious and for the most part boring, but this is all part of it. So I wipe this down, and I tend to keep, I start with typically one of these rags, those terry rags, whatever they're called, and I'll start with one of those, and as it gets more material in it and gets wet, I will switch to a secondary rag. So I'll wipe it down with one and then wipe it down with the second one. Now, I'm just going over this, drying it out, and trying to find those little shiny spots that I want to get rid of. I also go through various layers or types of sanding paper. So I switch over to 1500 on the round block, and the reason for this is I want to follow that subtle curve of the deck lid. It's easier in my mind to do it with the round block because you're working with a small portion of that sandpaper. You're not using a flatter block that could cause some problems. So address those little areas, continue on, dry it out, look for shiny spots. Here I am going over the top section. You can see I've already sanded the thicker material that was in the radius, as I had mentioned, where it had built up. I went over that, I think, with 800 as well, and I'm doing 1200 here, just trying to get all the transitions right. I did find that there were some areas basically above where the hinges would mount that seemed a little bit low. And I dealt with this before whenever I was doing the prep work on this panel. I could see kind of low areas, and I showed it in another video. I'd sanded all that out and built that up with primer. Now what I'm trying to do here is put some water on it and check for the flow and see if it indicates any more of that high spot that I have, and it does. So I'm just focused on that narrow strip of the high build of a clear coat. Going over it with the rag and seeing, a lot of times you can feel that those flaws with a rag. So as you're going over it, you can feel the ridge, or you can feel dust nibs and stuff like that with the rag, because sometimes your fingers become a little desensitized. I also do this on occasion with a paper towel. I will go over something and feel for any bumps or deviations. So this is where I wiped it down with both rags, and I let it dry out here, and I'm just going over it with 2500 at this point. And for the most part, I'm happy with how this deck lid looks. I may also, I know I've showed it, I go over it with 3000 and 5000, but I do also have a soft pad that I can put on the DA that I may do all this again with that. As I go through this process, I'd only do this once a year, basically, so a lot of times I have to kind of rethink my processes, but this is what I typically do, and it seems to work, and so that's what I go with. So hope that helps in this situation. Okay, so I've done some work on the deck lid. As I showed previously, I'm not ready to buff that yet, but I want to talk about this run right here. Now basically that's the only run on this whole fender. There's some dust nibs up on top, up in this area, and I'll address those a little differently. But I want you to see, I hope that the light is catching that run the way I want to show it to you. So let me zoom in a little bit and refocus this just a little. Okay, you can see it there. Now, the challenge is, we've got a couple things here. You've got this edge, which you want to try to avoid. I can see a little buildup right here on that edge, which makes it risky. But the main thing is this run. It's kind of a sag in a way. So I'm going to take a brand new razor blade. And I stress this, use a new one when you do these sort of things. And what I want to do is I'm going to scrape and try to reduce this bulge of that run. So you have to be pretty brave to do that, knowing that you run that risk of causing more problems. Now I'm not pushing super hard. I'm kind of just letting the razor scrape across that. And you can maybe, I don't know if it shows up super well, but you can see there's a line that I'm creating. And the biggest part of it is back here. So hopefully you can see that. I don't know how well it's showing up on the camera because I can't see. Now the object, of course, is to eliminate the run, but try to have a consistent scrape. So whenever you're done, it's a uniform shape. The heaviest part is to the back area right here. And you don't want to get the corners in. So sometimes what I've done is take the corners and grind them, round them off a little, so I don't have that risk of digging in. But this actually has a subtle curve. This fender has a subtle curve, so it kind of helps with that. Like I said, I'm not digging into this. Trying to get the hump out. Very time consuming. Can't get in a hurry. Now I've done another video where I've taken red spot putty and covered up an area like this and then sanded it until all the spot putty was gone, and that eliminates the run in the process. I'm just showing you some different techniques here. Hopefully you can see where it's still shiny, and that's just showing you still the high material. Getting close though. I know, it's tedious. But if I don't show you, who else will? Right? That's pretty close. I see a little buildup on this edge, has me just a little bit concerned. I'm just gonna knock that off a little. And I don't normally get close to the edge, but I know when I'm going to be sanding on this, that edge is going to become part of it. Like, I'm going to hit that. So I might as well get some of it out of the way and take that chance. You can see it there. Okay, I've probably made you nervous enough, but I can see a little ripple here and there, and so all I'm trying to do is make sure those are eliminated before I start sanding. So there you go. That's the basics of getting that run out of there. Now, I'm going to be doing some other things, but I want to show you a little bit more as I'm doing this. I will be using this rigid Durablock, and let me zoom out just a little bit. So, like I said, I'll be using this rigid Durablock to get started. And I'm probably going to use some 800 grit, I think. Now all I'm going to do is a little bit of knocking it down with the 800. I'm not looking to finish it off. I'm looking to just basically get it started. You know, you can overdo it with any of these. So I've got a bucket of water with a little bit of Dawn dishwashing liquid in it, and all I want to do gently start sanding on this. Now I'm just letting the block glide over this. I'm not pushing. I mean, I'm barely even making pressure with one finger, you know, as I'm doing this. The object is to just get the initial cut started on this, and then I will take a rag and wipe that down. Now you can see I didn't do much of nothing there, honestly. Let me blow that dry real quick. Now you can see the orange peel, hopefully see the orange peel. I can't tell if it's showing up in the camera very well. So there's a little bit of orange peel here. But this first knockdown of that run is doing well. So I'm going to just continue to do some of this in this area. And I'm not digging in. I'm just letting the block glide over this with the water, helping it slide. Edges are the most troublesome. You know, really you don't want to sand the edge, but I have to because I'm so close to that. And the reason is whenever you're doing that, you run the risk of coming over and knocking off paint. So just trying to be careful. A little bit of that. Now I'm going to be going over the whole fender with the blocks. And I'm going to get all the orange peel out of it, or as much as I possibly can, I should say. So maybe you can still see that right there, a little bit of a shiny spot. I know it's really hard to show this on the camera. See that right there? Now that may not be that critical, but while I'm here, I'm going to address that. So I'm going to keep on working this section of the fender. This is nice and almost perfectly smooth now. I got a little bit of a ridge right there, and I can feel it. You probably can't see it very well. And I'm just going to continue to work that down with this 800. So that looks pretty good now. There's still a little shiny spot right there, which is okay. It'll show up, it'll blend in when I buff. Now, that feels pretty good. That feels pretty good. So, I'll go over this whole fender basically with the 800, but then I'll come back and I have some 1200 right here. So I will continue to go over this. Now 800 is a little aggressive, I will admit, and 1200 can be even aggressive. But all I'm doing is kind of a step knockdown. I'm not digging. I'm just trying to get the top edge off as I do this. And what I mean by that is it's the top edge of the orange peel. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to some of this. But that took care of that run. It's gone. It's gone. Now I'm going to show you something else. You can see the clock on that reflection over there. I don't know how well the dust nibs are showing up on here. If you can see them or not, I don't know. So you have a couple little dust nibs. And there's a couple ways you can address this. One is you could just sand them. And two is you can use a cutting block. Now, they sell these, I think, I don't know who it is. There's a company that sells these in a pack. These were actually custom made for me by Roger, my neighbor. So the idea is you can take this. This is a really sharp corner, and you can skim this across. And you can probably just see just enough that it'll catch, and then take that top of that off. The idea is you're not sanding this off. You're kind of scraping it off, so you can see maybe a little bit of material showing up on the edge right there. Now you don't have to do this. This is just something that I've seen done, and I like it because it helps eliminate those areas pretty quickly. And so when you're sanding, it cleans up a little easier. So there's a bunch of these, and all I'm gonna, you don't want to dig in, you know, you'll cause problems if you dig in. And I'm actually gonna I'll make this move in a kind of cross pattern, let's say, so I'm not pushing right up against it. I'm cutting a little bit sideways as I go. So that's another thing. Again, they sell these. You can buy them. I don't know how much they cost, but you can see the material there. And I'm going to do some more towards the back. Here's a good one. So I'm just going to shave that top off. It's kind of like using that razor blade, only it feels a little less risky because this lays flat. Another one of those things where you got to be brave to make it happen. Of course, the rest of this I will sand, and I would just do a skim with the 800 just to break the surface. That's all I want to do. You could go straight to 1200. It would be fine. Some might even start with 1500. I may live on the edge just a little bit more. Yeah, I'm not pushing hard. I'm just letting it kind of glide over this. I'm going to go to the 1200 and repeat. I'm going to put this on time lapse so that we're just not being bored. Same process as before. I go over this with the 800 on the flat block, and then I will switch over to the round block so I can get up in the radius of the fender there where it curves upward, following up with a few dust nib areas that I'm trying to address. And this may not be the last time that I do this. I'm addressing all these right now, and I'm prepping it for the sand or the buffing process. So as I'll suggest later, typically what I like to do is everything sanded and then do the buffing process. So I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit here as I'm taking care of this fender, and I'm going to do a buffing sequence on it. I wanted to demonstrate that in this particular video and just show you some of the techniques that I use to make this stuff better. Okay, here's where we're at. Now, normally when I'm doing this stuff, I would do everything. Like I would prep the whole car. I would sand it, take care of all the runs, get all that done, and then come back and do some buffing. So you saw in the sequence, of course, I talked you through using a razor blade on this front section here, and then I went through the various grits of sandpaper. So I have this bucket, and I have different blocks in here, all these different grits. The last one that I used, and I didn't demonstrate, was this 5000. Now, there could be a lot of ways to do this. I'm just showing you some of the stuff that I do. You can see now, even at this point, how shiny basically that is with all of that sanding it's been done to it. I'm going to just show you what I use, and you can make your own decisions as to whether you want to do this or have it done a different way. So what I was taught to do years ago is use, basically I have this DeWalt variable speed 90-degree buffer, and I have 3M wool pad. So there's 05753, and on that I have written 36060. That corresponds to the bottle of compound that I'm going to use. Now 3M does a good job here because white with a white cap, so easy to relate those two. The next round is the black pad, and this is a foam pad 05707. That is 06064, and that is the compound machine polish. Black cap, black pad. This, the blue pad, 05708, and here you see I have blue 6068, 06068, ultra fine machine polish. That's what I use. Now there's different speeds, there's stuff, I'm not gonna probably go through all that because everybody may have their own technique of how fast they want to go with the 90-degree buffer. Also, I should point out, this has a quick disconnect. So this collar slides back, and these have a retainer that goes around this, locks it in. So you can look it up. 3M will recommend different speeds for buffing and polishing, but I'm going to go through this. Now, one thing I want to stress when you're using any of these, but particularly the wool, when you're trying to avoid coming up on this edge as much as possible, you're also trying to avoid these edges, but you can approach those by this direction. And what I mean is the wool pad is turning clockwise, so when you're coming up here, it is actually skimming off of this flange. If you were back here, it would be coming against this flange, right? So what you can do, and I will probably manipulate this fender up onto the stand. I'll put some blankets on it and different things, but I can do that front edge with the wool pad cutting away from the edge or over top of the edge, and then this one I can set the fender up and cut this way, right? So that it's over top of the flange and not coming into the flange. Hope you get that. It's always a risk when you have an edge or you have a corner because the material is going to be thinner on those corners. So I'm going to get this set up. I'll probably do most of this in time lapse just because it's easier to go through the process, and then we'll see how it looks. Now I know that previous sequence was boring, but it also demonstrates what it takes to make some of the stuff go away. So I wanted to make sure I show that in these videos. Now, what I'm doing here with the wool pad, of course, is trying to work a section at a time. So I'm just using the middle of the fender as my stop point, basically, and just working from one end to the other and try to get everything smoothed out on that particular part of the fender. As I do this, I'll wipe it down with a rag and look for anything that I may have missed, and I moved on to the top of the fender. Now what you'll notice here is I have my knee against the bottom of the fender so that I keep it from rotating away or out from under the buffing tool. Again, I'm working towards the middle of the fender and then working from the middle to the front of the fender. I don't do buffing but once or twice a year, if that, and I don't mind doing it. I just know that you do have risks involved, and sometimes you can run the buffer too fast and you can burn the clear, and I tend to operate on maybe a slower RPM than most people. So with the wool pad, I'm using 1400 as my reference. You also notice that I'm setting the bottle down sideways on the floor. This is just a habit I've developed because as I go through this compound and the bottle has less and less in it, basically if you stand it up, all that compound goes to the bottom of the bottle, and then you have to shake it out and get it back up into, the neck. So I just find it easier to lay the bottle down on the floor sideways, and it's closer to being ready, let's say, to add more compound. Going through these different areas of the fenders, you can really got to be careful. As I've mentioned earlier, with where the edges of the fender are and how the wool pad can create problems there, you just have to be careful in those areas. Now, what I found in this little spot was something I didn't like, so I pulled out the 2500 sandpaper again. There's nothing wrong with that. You do this as many times as you feel you need to, but just know that every time you do this, you're reducing the amount of clear coat on the fender. So just be cautious of that. This is why it pays off to put on multiple layers of clear. In my case, when I sprayed the clear, I did a tack coat, and then I did 2 build coats, or 2 high build coats. Now, this gave me a lot of material to work with. Now, I switched over to the black pad, and this is the normal sequence with this kind of tool. So what I've done is I've added material, or I've added more compound there, because the pad will absorb some of that, let's say. And once you start running it, you'll notice it'll kind of cling a little, or kind of feel sticky. So by adding more compound, the pad becomes a little more compliant and doesn't want to bite into the material so much. So again, be careful on the edges, wipe it down, get a good look at it, see if you have any dull spots or areas that need more attention, and continue on from there. I'll work this midsection of the fender once again, and once I'm happy with that, I'll move on to the front section of the fender. I always try to be cautious around the radius of the wheel opening and stuff like that, and these little edges of the fender as you come forward. You can easily bite into something and cause a problem. Right there I had some dry compound, so I added a little more to help clean off that dry compound, because if you don't, it's really hard to get off with one of these rags. So work at top of the fender, same situation, go back and forth, watch what you're doing, watch for streaks, watch for the shine to appear, and then move on to the front section. This compound, I know right now, I checked into it, the bottle, the first bottle I used, it's about $60 on Amazon. I did check at Summit Racing when I was there yesterday, and it's a little bit more than that at Summit Racing. So now I switch over to the blue, and I'm going to go through some of this with the blue pad and the compound, and then I'm going to switch over and do a demonstration with it at regular speed, because it's one thing to see it like this, but it's another one to actually hear and see the process. You also notice I'm wearing a respirator. You don't want to have the dust or the fumes from this stuff accumulate in your lungs, so be cautious with this stuff as you're using it. So things are looking pretty good. I'm going to finish this up just in a regular sequence. And I will say that I'm running the buffer at about 1400 RPM. So 3M recommends 1200 to 2000, so you can adjust from there if you like. will say the blue stuff goes a lot further, so you don't need as much on the panel. Okay, that looks really good to me. Now I may take this out in the sun and look at it a little more, but pretty happy with that. So obviously I'll have to do this to the other fender and all the other pieces and parts, but I just wanted to do the demonstration of the process for now on this fender. So unfortunately I don't have a lot of sun out today. It's overcast, but I think it turned out pretty good. There's still some little places where you could see where there were some dust nibs. You know, you can just beat yourself to death trying to get every single thing out of there, and it may or may not pay off in the end, but that's where we're at. So I am happy with that. So now I'm starting on the door, and I'm using the big block or the big Durablock to get the main center section of the door. This is a good time to use that because the door, even though it has a subtle curve, the block will just flow right across that. And I'm not digging in very hard. I'm letting the block do the work and trying to just get it as smooth as I can. And as I'm doing this, I realize that there's a flaw in the front. I find a run that I didn't really notice before as I was looking the car over. So I do the same thing that I did on the fender. I take the razor blade and I'm just scraping it down, and trying to get it flushed out as much as I possibly can. This is a risky thing to do, I know, and I've shown it before where I used on Jade. I did a quarter panel that had run, and that video demonstrated the spot putty technique that I used, and that works very well. Depending on where you're at, it's probably the easier way to do it, but again, it takes a lot of time because as you're sanding that stuff away, you're taking off the body filler and also the clear coat. So I'm going over the door, and you can see as I'm doing this, even after sanding on it with the various grits of sandpaper, I think I'm at 1500 on this one, I think. But you can see how well this reflects. I'm working on the top section of the door at this point, and that paper is, I believe, the 1200. And I like to use the round block in these situations. The square blocks or the flat blocks are more risky because as you come down into the radius, you can create a line. So this, I'm just continuing on with the various grits of sandpaper and working these areas down. There was some orange peel in this, and that's pretty common, you know. You won't always get it as smooth as you think you will, so that's why you have to do this sort of thing. I did wipe it down with the blue rag, and then I used the brown rag, and then I used the air hose because it really helps to have it dried out so you can see all of the shiny spots that are more than likely still there. Okay, I wanted to show you a couple things. This is really turning out nice. Mostly smooth all the way through here. You can see a little orange peel back in this area. Not a huge concern. The lower section looks really good. There's a little more orange peel right there. And I'll probably try to get that out. Up here at the edge, I'm going to be careful. Again, not trying to go up too far. There's a little dust nib right there I can probably make go away, and just a little texture at the bottom. So I'll continue going through with the various grits of sandpaper. I don't think I'm going to worry at this point at the bottom of the door. I don't know yet. I may address some of that because it's really hard to see that from standing up, walking by. There's probably some texture there that I can probably get out. And I doubt that I'll do anything with the rocker panel. That's a very difficult space to work with. So there's a couple little dust nibs up here that I got out the main part with the little tool that I used. So just continue on, and then I'll move on and get the rest of it. So I'm going to go over those shiny areas, and I'm continuing on with the 1500 grit sandpaper, just working the main center section of the door with that big square block, let's say, and then I'll switch over to the round block once again and do the same thing, work these upper areas on the top section of the door. And I know that I had mentioned that I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the bottom, but I also know me. So I'm going to do some of that on the bottom edge of the door as I progress through this. I want to have this car looking as good as I can. And, if it takes a little more effort, that's fine. I'm not worried about it. I know that a lot of people want to see this car completed and nice and shiny, and that's my goal as well. So switch over to the 2000, go over the midsection of the door once again, and you just have to know this is the process. Switching over to the round block, going up to the top section of the door, and you can just see the cloudy water as the clear coat comes off. That way you're making a cut, or you're making improvements, let's say. Wipe it down once again, get a look at it, blow it all dry, and look for those shiny spots. Now you can see on the body line it's still shiny there, and I'm trying not to get into that if I can avoid it. I don't want to have problems with that material, as I said before, where it gets thinner. So you just got to be careful with those areas. Working it all down, and I'll switch over to the other blocks later on, but this is all I'm going to do at this point on the door. Let me show you where I'm at in this process. I don't know if I showed it or not. You may have been able to see it somewhere, but the deck lid had a kind of a buildup of clear coat, kind of like a wave coming across here. I got that straightened out. I got the back area all straightened out. On the cowl, I didn't do much. I wanted to take care of a few of the little dust nibs because all of this is going to get blacked out anyway, so I don't really need to worry about this at this point. The hood, I'm not doing anything with it yet. I just like to stare at it. So you saw where I had done the fender, and I think it turned out pretty nice. There's still a couple little things that bug me, and I may go back and redo them. A couple little dust bumps right there, but nothing that I couldn't just leave. I know I get really picky and want to take care of every single thing, but sometimes you can't do that, and I'm still on the fence with that. I don't know yet. On the main body, I sanded out the door and I did a demonstration. Again, I had a little bit of a run or sag right there. For the most part, the door is all sanded and ready for buff. I'll probably go over it again just to make sure I get everything cleaned up. The roof, I've gone over this with 1200, 1500, and 2000. I may still hit it with, I take it back, I also hit it with 2500. I may do another round of 3000 just because I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. So this quarter, the top section is done. I still have the side to do, but I wanted to just focus on the upper parts right now. I still have to do the deck filler. There's just a couple of dust nibs in there. And on this one, I showed in the video that I had a sag running all the way down. And I got really aggressive with this. I will say that. I actually used 600 to knock that down, and then I hit it with 800, 1200, 1500, and 2000 and 2500. I think it looks pretty good. I don't see the wave anymore, and on the roof I can still see a couple little shiny spots. I don't know if they show up very well, and I may even address those. But you know, it's a tedious process. Painting is one thing, but the follow-up is lengthy, at least in my case. I know some people would probably just look over certain things and just let them go, but I want to have this looking as good as I possibly can, and so I'm going to take my time and get everything sanded out. I still have, there's a dust nib right there, a little tiny one there. I still have a bit of a run right there and right there. I'll do the same thing with the razor blade, scrape those out and then sand it all down. There's a bunch of dust nibs on the top of this fender, but all that'll clean up, so not too worried about that. So before you hit the thumbs up and the like, I want you to consider what you're watching and think about the value this has for yourself and for other people. I try to do this as much as I can, sharing information, sharing techniques, sharing ideas, and make it so everybody gets something out of these videos. I thank you for being here. I thank my patrons especially for supporting me. Without them, as I said it before, I wouldn't even want to do this anymore as far as making videos. So I'm going to continue doing that because of them. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, there are links in the description below. Also links to Amazon and the welders and spray gun, whatever I have that I've used in this process. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, look at the links down below. But you know, it's a long process. It's not something like the TV shows where they show it and a week later they're done. It doesn't happen that way, especially when you're just one person doing all the work. You just can't, you know. So I do what I can. I try to get it done to the best of my abilities, and I hope you enjoy watching. So that'll be it for this video. And until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.